Okay, folks, so I wanted to do a video that talks about Tacoma's economic success because, a lot of people still are stuck in the past, if you will, when it comes to Tacoma. And those are people who had lived here 30 years ago or back when, Reagan was president and prior. And they judged Tacoma based on what it was like back before 1995 or so. Tacoma in the 70s and 80s, like a lot of cities that most of these people who talk about this are from, was going through a steep decline. I mean, if you look at New York City back in the 80s, it was going through a downward spiral as well. So I think people forget that, but they really hold Tacoma to just such a very low place for really no reason. It was going through what most cities of its size and bigger were going through at the time. And actually, if you look at even the crime back in even the worst time in Tacoma, there were other cities in the nation that completely were much more of a problem and had a much higher crime rate, even if you consider, population to crime ratio. But anyway, that's besides the point. This video is talking about the economic success, and people, someone made a comment, probably trolling, saying that, Tacoma was a dump. They were here back in the 80s. Well, yeah, probably so. There were a lot of cities that were in the dump. A lot of the, I'm from the kind of the Midwest. A lot of the river cities were a dump back in the 80s and 90s. Now, I was born in 1978, so I can't really sit and visually tell you what it was like in the 1980s because, I don't really know. But a lot of those cities just only started to recover back when I was leaving high school, which I graduated in 1996. So they were starting to recover at that time. But some of them still carried the scars of the past. And I'm talking about places like Cincinnati, Louisville, Pittsburgh, all of those places, Cleveland, all of those places were trying to build themselves back up. Okay, and now today things are a little bit different for them. Well, that's the same thing for Tacoma. Right now, Tacoma, if you look at downtown, or it's kind of out from downtown over to Point Defiance, it's going through $1 billion worth of investment, at least, if not more. And most of that is in housing, but there are also big commercial projects. Now, part of this is the zoo. If you notice, I put on here that the summer of 2018, the Pacific Seas Aquarium at the Tacoma Zoo, well, actually it's the Point Defiance Zoo, is going to open. Well, part of that $1 billion I was talking about is part of this aquarium project, which also has a big crane. When we went to the zoo, you probably saw that, but there's this huge crane that is there that's building the aquarium. The other thing is the waterfront has been redeveloped, along with a new large park that was dedicated to an author. That's been developed over there. There's going to be a nice pedestrian bridge that goes from Point Defiance all the way to this new park, and then all the way to Point Ruston, the Tacoma side of Point Ruston. So Point Ruston, you've seen videos about that, of all of the retail that it has, the new theater, and the development that's on top of that. If you add that in, that also attributes to that $1 billion that I've been talking about that's been going on. Then when you come further down into downtown, you see a lot of development that makes up the bulk of this $1 billion or more that's been going on. Part of that goes with the Tide Flats, with the large building that UPS is going to take over. Part of that is in the new Hotel Convention Center, which you see here on your screen. Part of that is a lot of the new residential mid-rises that are going up, where they're in the planning stages of going up. Right next to the University of Washington, there's an entire block that is going to be redeveloped over time. Now, that's not counted into the figure of the $1 billion, but that is kind of what's going on. Right now, Tacoma has a lot of sky cranes going up. It doesn't compare to what you see in Seattle, of course, but there are a lot of cranes going up. You see them over at Point Ruston, you see it over at Point Defiance, and you're seeing it in downtown Tacoma. So there's quite a few that are actually in the sky, and it even mentions that Tacoma is Crane City. Cranes are up at Point Ruston. There's a development known as the Napoleon. I know the developer of this, actually. And then 135 unit apartment building at Tacoma South Avenue and the Convention Center Hotel project. So talking about in the second quarter of 2018, the cranes will go up for the Town Center project, and what's certain is that more will follow. Now, the Town Center project has been a long-awaited plan to actually have kind of like a lifestyle mall. It's basically where it's not like the traditional malls where you go into a big giant box and there's a lot of people indoors. There's a lot of people that are actually able to park their car someplace and walk to their actual destination. So it gives you more of a pedestrian style friendly atmosphere. And in fact, the Town Center project is going to have it where you're easily able to ride your bike to it. It happens to also be right next to, it's actually built in the Brewery District of Tacoma, but it's right next to the University of Washington, Tacoma. So the Town Center project will have a lot of retail down below, and you guessed it, right above it will be residential. So it's a mixed-use development that will also have office space, but mostly residential, and then a lot of retail down below. There's also talk that the project will either contain a movie theater or a grocery store. Given the amount of residential space that's going up downtown, more than likely, this will probably be a grocery store. One of the other projects that's not talked about in this is there is going to be a lot of redevelopment of old existing buildings. The Elks Lodge is another example. That's going to be turned into a entertainment venue. So that's part of that $1 billion as well. And then I think it's called the Washington Building. You have to excuse, the chickens are in the man cave, so they're having a field day. We have baby chicks that are still too young to go outside. But anyhow, I think it's called the Washington Building. But this large building is actually being converted into residential spaces. It's where the nightclub Element used to be. And so that's a part of that other $1 billion that I was talking about overall when you add up what's going on. So when people say Tacoma's a dump, you don't invest $1 billion into a dump, especially with all these over a dozen projects going on, probably around 24 projects, if not more. So they were talking about how 2017 was a phenomenal year. The amazing growth was in all different sectors. You saw the rise of multifamily sectors and a balanced economy. It hit all markets. There was the implementation of foreign investments in the city that represents the largest projects in the downtown, which is true. This hotel is being built by a Chinese developer, and they're using the EB-5 program to actually do that. One of the large apartment buildings being built more into the center of downtown is also being developed by a Vietnamese developer using the same program. And then the Town Center project, again, Chinese developers using the EB-5 program, and they have a connection with this hotel. Not the same people, but they're basically kind of working in tandem. It tells you about the rise of multifamily sector was marked by 810 new units breaking ground in 2017. There are now future plans for more than 1,238 multifamily transit-oriented development units. Now under construction are the 172-unit Stadium Apartments in Stadium District, the Napoleon, the 139-unit Grand on Broadway, which will include commercial space, the 35-unit Madison 25 on Proctor Street, and the 104-unit Cause, which are fully furnished 250 to 400 square foot apartments adjacent to the UW Tacoma campus. In the planning phase is the 115-unit tracks at the Tacoma Dome. Now, what this is telling you is that basically Tacoma is a market where, and it's been really nationally, this has been talked about, it is the place where developers need to come to put in multi-unit or multifamily buildings. A lot of these are mixed-use facilities because they have the retail element below and then they have housing up above. But the reason why is because even though the cost to build in Tacoma is the same as it is in Seattle, the rent prices are starting to escalate, and the land prices here are a little bit cheaper. So if you are a pretty decent sized developer, you can literally come to a city like Tacoma, buy land at a pretty bargain rate, and build a probably we're talking at least 6 to 8 story building, a mid-rise building, and watch the rents actually start to increase over time. And so you're getting into the market before some of the big, huge developers like Vulcan, which is owned by Paul Allen in Seattle. They've built a lot of South Lake Union and Amazon's buildings before they get in, right? Because once Tacoma reaches the same price or close to the same price as Seattle, then you're going to start seeing big developers like Vulcan and some of the others come in with these very large 20 and 30 story buildings. All right. Right now, there's not enough of a profit margin for them to come here just quite yet. But that's going to be changing. A significant reason for commercial and multifamily housing growth downtown was attributed to the cascade of foreign investment. The $150 million convention center hotel project that broke ground last year is set to open in 2020. It's talking about the Chinese investor that backed it out of Shanghai. The Town Center project broke ground late last year. We're talking really late last year. It's a $125 million project, which is housing, retail, and office space. It's also backed by a Chinese investor. And then finally, the Haley that broke ground in October 2017 is a $43 million mixed-use housing project located next to the Tacoma Public Library. And this is the one I was telling you about, which is backed by a Vietnamese investor. Okay, so all of them are using what's called the EB5 investment. The other parts of this that people may not know is, although their ownership structure is local, the Napoleon and Point Ruston are also supported by significant shares in EB5 investment. So what this means is that, let's say I am a local developer and I don't have all of the money to build a project. Let's say I have $20 million, but the project's $45 million. So I need another $25 million. I can look for people in other countries who have the money and basically apply for this EB5 program to be part of that project. And those who invest a certain amount of money are then able to live here in the United States. That's how that whole program works. So basically, for them to buy a share of the project and invest in that, then they're also going to literally be allowed to live in the United States. So that's how the EB5 program works. And there's more details on it than that. That's oversimplifying it. These foreign investments were procured through relationships forged many years ago. For example, our former mayor, Mayor Strickland, traveled to Vietnam ultimately to cultivate investment from that country and led to the development of the Haley. That project would have never happened had she not did that, more than likely. Meanwhile, much is to be said about the significant growth in the industrial development and the tide flat region. Now, this is right there close to the port area of Tacoma. It's right downtown. This is something that's very important that you don't really see in Seattle. Seattle doesn't have the space for this, but Tacoma does. 3 new multi-million-dollar industrial centers will open over the next several years, comprising Prologis Park IPT Logistics Center and DCT Blair Logistics Center. Total build-out across all 3 centers is 3.9 million square feet. The centers will attract new employers, providing 1,000 to 3,000 new high-paying jobs. Other industrial developments include Tool Gauge expanding in Tacoma, Netherlands-based new cold storage development under construction, and the Bracken expanding in Tacoma with a total investment of $12.5 million. Now, this new cold storage structure is pretty cool because it's this big, large, giant rectangle that most people didn't know even what it was. And we found out it's like a huge cold storage warehouse, basically, kind of a high-tech type center. But it basically, people from another country came and invested in that. When you look at Prologis Park, it says down below that new employers will provide between 1,000 and 3,000. Really, by itself, UPS is going to hire 1,200 people. just by itself, and it's taken over, I think, somewhere in the neighborhood of 800 to 900,000 square feet of this 3.9 million square feet. Okay, so there's 3 of these buildings down there totaling this entire footprint that we're talking about. So that figure of 1,000 is not correct. It's obviously by far more than that, just by that one company coming in, and I know that for a fact. Okay. So in terms of job creation and unit control, I will say, now I don't know how true it is with this statement here of newly high-paying jobs or new high-paying jobs. UPS doesn't really pay a lot unless you're in supervisor positions or greater. And then, you know, that's still questionable. So I don't know how true it is for them to say that it's new high-paying jobs. Some of those might be. And some of these other companies that I don't know much about, like Tool Gauge and this new cold storage in Bracken, they may pay really well, but I can say that UPS does not pay. It's not a high-paying job. In terms of job creation and unit construction, this will be a banner year. Kim Beater, I'm butchering that, interim director of economic and community development, said the city is prepared to take advantage of the compression factor it's experiencing from Seattle, whether that is in housing or in business. Tacoma is becoming newly discovered, offering new business opportunities, which is true. So Tacoma is experiencing this massive surge because of the simple fact that it's too expensive for many to build in Seattle. It's just becoming way too expensive for land. It's becoming way too expensive just overall cost. When you look at this particular structure here that I'm running the mouse over, this portion right here exists. This is the convention center. This building here already exists, and down below is a wonderful sushi place that Noelle and I went to. It's really, really nice. This part here, starting from here over to here, doesn't exist. And that's going to be part of the hotel part. What they didn't tell you is if this becomes a success, they're going to build another tower that is similar to this one, and it's all residential. So while this is a hotel, the other tower that could go up would be nothing but residential space. So anyhow, that's pretty much it. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. I wanted to talk a little bit about what the projects are. If you drive around downtown Tacoma, you'll see all of these places where construction is going on. No, we don't have the big towers going up everywhere like you see in Seattle, but what we're seeing is kind of what Seattle went through in the 90s of all of these mid-rises, which later gave way to these big, huge concrete towers that they're experiencing now. So anyhow, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them down in the comment section below. And until next time, I will see you. Take care.